Yeah, Dewey Machila Yoda. We don't know if she gave birth before she was born, in which case the owner of the ox is not responsible for the death of the calf. Or Mishnach Yoda. We don't know. No. If maybe she only gave birth, or she gave birth only after she was gored. She was gored, and therefore what? So the goring killed the baby. Mishalim Chatzinezik Lepar. So assuming that the ox is a tom, so he pays half damages. So he pays half damages for the cow. Okay, we're via Levlad, and a quarter of the whole damage, which is a half of the half for the baby. That's a simple famous position that holds that Mamana with the Basafik holding when the case itself, not the claims, but the case itself is doubtful to everyone. Anybody who looks at this case doesn't know. You can't. The case is doubtful. Yes, it's not a question of claims. He claims this, they claim that. It's not a question that the case puts everybody in doubt. We just don't know what happened. So you split it. So you eye by eye. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Why should I make him responsible for this calf? Even half. Why don't we follow the majority of pregnant cows? Well, parsmas abras yoldos. Most cows get pregnant and they come to term and they give birth to live. They give birth to live baby. Okay. So we're gonna have to say what? Since most cows don't give birth to dead calves, and this cow gave birth to a dead calf, we have to follow the robe and say what? That it wasn't the cow that gave birth to a dead calf; it was a dead calf as a result of the goring. Why don't you follow the majority? If you follow the majority, so you're not gonna. He shouldn't pay. He shouldn't pay anything for the calf at all.
No.
No, you should pay.
If you follow, pardon me. With the other, you pardon me. Yeah. So if you follow, If you follow the majority, he has to pay. He should pay for the. He should pay. He should pay for the whole half of the calf, right?
The mnemonic
Yeah.
is half calf.
Half calf of the calf, right? Okay. Okay, you follow it. So kasha to Rav. Okay. Is kasha to Rav. If you would follow the majority, it's a kasha to Rav.
No, Rav says
a kasha. It's a no. It's a kasha to Rav. Why? Because Rav says you follow the majority. If you follow the majority, you should pay for the whole half, for the whole half of the cow.
The argument.
Yeah. It's a kasha to Rav. Okay. So the Gemara says. Okay. So you should do it. Okay. The Gemara says no. It's not a. We can answer the kasha. Okay, over there, okay, we're in doubt. What do you mean to say? You're making a mistake. It's quite possible that the cow gave birth because it was afraid of the ox. Okay, but now remember, and you're not responsible for killing a thing by making it afraid. It's only called secondary damage, and you won't be responsible. So it's not just, okay. Some people say what came from behind. Some people say no, it came from behind. It didn't scare it, and it damaged it by what? By actually hitting it. And if what have you we're in doubt. We'll call So one possibility, we have to split it, but you have to understand one thing. There's a thing called we put the two miyuts together. I'll explain what I mean. It's true. Let's say that most cows come to full term, and they give birth to live babies, and only a minority doesn't. So you're right. So if we follow the majority, he should pay. If you follow the majority, so he should pay for everything. The only thing is what we said. There's also, but there is a minority of cows that miscarry. Okay, that don't come to term. Now, if I take that minority, there's a second minority to add to it. What is that? There's a minority. In this case, there's a possibility that what? Even though usually the case will be what? That the cow came in from the front and from the back. You came from the back and the it. But there's a minority possibility also what? That it scared it and it wasn't responsible. So if I take the minority of cows that give birth, not full term, they miscarry, and I take the minority possibility of what that he scared it. So the combination of two cases where he's not responsible is enough is so to speak the equivalent of the majority of cows coming to full term. So therefore we remain in doubt, and he only pays for half of the half. Okay, lema katanai. Now let me ask a kasha. Okay, but maybe Rav and Shmuel are themselves arguing with Tanaim. Why? Because we learned. Let me show you. There's kasha to both. Sure, Rav and Imtza Shor Vitzido. There's a whole herd of cows that are grazing, and one of those cows. Okay, we found next to that we found a dead. We found a dead. One. The oxen are all, grazing, and we find one ox dead next to the other one. And Afal Pisha Zemenuga. Even though what? We see the calf, we see the cow, the dead ox was gored. And this one, and the cow next to it is what? Is an animal or a cow that was already a 3-time gore. Okay, or as a gore, a zet menushach. We see the cow that's dead was bitten. And this other ox was what was known to be a biter. Ain omen, we don't say biyodua shezen negacha. We don't make the assumption that what? That this is the one that gored this dead cow, or there was in a shachar, or this is one alternative that bit this one. We don't follow that. Now that's called what? That's called an umdana, or a presumption, or a chazaka. Since we have a status quo that this ox is what? Is a gorer, why don't we assume that the gorer gored? And that's how it died. In other words, because the Chazaka says, I continue the status quo. The status quo, this ox is a gore. It must be this. And we see this, the ox that's dead, it was gored. This ox was a biter. We see that the ox that's dead is bitten. So we assume that the biter bit and the gorer gored. Okay, now that's not exactly our case. What are we debating? We're debating majorities, not status quos. But we're going to see in a second. Okay, we're going to see in a second that we can equate them. There's reason to equate them. But we continue. We learn. Rav Acha says, apparently camels, when they're having sex, they become very proprietary, and they attack everyone around them. They want to be by themselves. So therefore, what? So if a gamal ocher ben gemalim ben gemalim. The camel was involved in cohabitation amongst other camels are there. But imsa gamahar b'tzida, we find a dead camel next to it. B'yaduish is there. It's known shezaharago that this camel killed it. Why? So now, so we see what. So the first opinion said what? Notice what? That we don't extend the status quo of the goring ox to the gored ox. And the second opinion said what? That we do extend the status quo of what? Of a cohabiting camel to the camel that's killed. So Ruah, and then the base medrash, they analyze it this way. The Ruba Chazaki Gadadinenu. That the truth is that the principle of status quo and the principle of majority work together. They're interchangeable. If you accept the status quo, you'll accept the majority. If you accept the majority, you'll accept the status quo. And therefore what? So if we say that, so if the first opinion said what? We don't extend the status quo. The second opinion, when it came to the oxen, and the second opinion said what? That we do extend the status quo, like by the camel. So we assume Lema Rav, the Amar Rav Acha. Let's say Rav is the one who held like Rav Acha. Why? Because Rav said you follow the majority. He must be the second opinion that we extend since the status quo of the cohabiting camel is that he's a destroyer. We'd assume that the destruction happened from him. Okay, so Rav was following Rav Acha. Shmuel, the Amar, and Shmuel said, "What we don't follow the majority. It's Katana Kama." He held like the first opinion that we don't extend the status quo of the goring ox to the gored ox. So each of them is personally against a Tana. Rav says, "Get out of here! I'm not against any Tana." He says, "Ana damrafilo the Tana Kama." I who say that you follow the majority, even I would agree with the first opinion that we don't extend the status quo. Ad kan kamar Tanakama. Ad kan lo kamar Tanakama some elo dlozlina basachazaka. The Tanakama just said we don't follow status quo. We don't extend the presumption of status quo in money. Avo basaruba zlina, but what? But a majority is stronger than a status quo, he says. And therefore what? Even he would agree with me that we use majorities to decide monetary law. Shmuel Amar, he'll say to you, he says, even though I hold that you don't follow majorities of money, I would agree with Ravacha that we do follow status quos. Ravacha said we follow status quo. Even I would agree with that. And even though we don't follow majorities, why? and this is very important, the hu gufe, okay, because the subject itself, it has the assumption of the status quo. I'll explain in 1 minute. But we don't follow majorities. Now let me explain. By majorities themselves, we can differentiate between one more powerful majority than another. Statistics is a gigantic subject in the Talmud. Gigantic. I always assign to my students, they want to write these papers. This is a paper. You want to write a paper on the rules of statistics in the Talmud. It's a massive, massive piece of research. Now, the thing is like this. We differentiate between two types of majorities. I'll give you an example. If I say that in a certain town, here, there are 9 stores sell kosher meat, and 1 store sells nevela, non-shechted meat. So when I find a piece of meat, I
say it's kosher.
Yeah, I say it's kosher. But what's the point? But that's called aruba the ita kaman. That majority, I know that it actually in reality exists. Now let me give you another one. Here, like the one we just did, for example. Here, I say, you know what? Most pregnancies that come to term. Most pregnancies are full term. But you want to know something? When you're judging a case, you don't know that that's true at this moment. If over time, what's called amelioration? Amelioration? No, is that with money? What's it called? When the money pays out. But over time, it's true.
Amortization.
What?
Amortization.
That's the word I'm looking for. So over time, it's true. Over time, the majority of pregnancies are full term. But in any given day or month, it could be the majority of pregnancies are what? Are miscarriages. At any given moment or any given hour. Over time, that's the truth. But you don't know at this moment that majority exists. It's not in front of you. You see, so one majority is here. I got a bunch of things in front of me. I knew 9 of them were kosher. One's not. The majority is sitting. I know in reality that ratio exists. If I say majority of pregnancies are full term, at any given time, today it may not be true. This hour it may not be true. You see what I'm saying? You never know. You never. Was it? If I walk one second. Let me explain. So you never know. You never know. So the thing is like this. When it comes to when we say majorities, a majority is it? Majority pass away. You don't know. That has nothing to do with this cow. How do you know this cow has anything to do with that? This cow could be for the minority. How come we don't play Russian roulette? Most of the chambers in the gun are empty. Why don't you shoot yourself? The answer is because this chamber might be the minority. You don't do it now, even though that's not fair because even the majority is in front of us. But we're just pointing out the point. Here you don't know. It could be, but in the case of the chazaka, where I know that cohabiting camels are wild. That I know that this camel is wild. I know it about this particular case in front of me. So therefore, you could say what? So therefore, by definition, it's the opposite. Even though before we proposed that the majorities are better than chazakas. Here we could say, listen, Shmuel says no. He says I hold that majorities don't work and chazakas are better. You know why? Because this thing, the object of discussion, has the presumption. Okay, so therefore each of them can defend themselves. Tashma, come. Let me again ask you, Kasha. We learned that mocha peris l'chabeiro. What about our Mishnah? If a person sells produce to his friend, okay, and they didn't specify whether that produce was for planting or for eating, uzron velotam. We learned in our Mishnah, and the person planted them and they didn't sprout. The afilu zer pishtan, even if it was flaxseed. Where the majority of that's bought is what? It's for planting. And a Chai Bachris, our Mishnah said what? He's not responsible. Doesn't have to pay him. Okay. Okay. My afilu. Why did you say even flax? Lav afilu zera pishtan deruba lizriya zabne. Isn't that the point? That even flax, where the majority of flaxseed that's sold is sold for what? For planting and not for eating. Afilu hachi, and nevertheless, law is lina basaruba. We don't follow the majority. So you see what? You see, okay, so you see, therefore, you have a kasha, powerful kasha from our Mishnah to Rav. You have a problem. Our mission is clearly holding what? That we don't follow the majority. Where it says, yeah, okay, here I'm going to have to back off. You're right. Tanai, he says, it is a machlokas Tanai. And the truth is, and Rob is following a Tana, not the Tana of our Mishnah. The Tana of our Mishnah, you're right, really holds that we don't follow the majority, and everybody in a monetary case can claim, I am from the minority. Okay, but I sold you for eating. Okay, but he has another Tana that supports him. The Tanya because we learned Hamocha Peres Lachaveru is Ron Velotzam. A person sold, let's say he sold produce to his friend, a seed, okay, and they didn't specify whether it's for seeding or for eating, and the guy planted them and they didn't sprout. Okay, so he said what? If it's Zaronigina Shein Nacholin, if it's what vegetable seeds, which people don't eat, they only plant them. Chai Bachwayusan. So then if they don't sprout, the guy has to pay him because why? Because everybody only because it's not some people they're bought for planting and they're not bought for eating. Zerapishtam, but if let's say it's flaxseed and a chai bachrusan, he doesn't have to pay. That's the first opinion. So the first opinion clearly holds that you follow the majority, that what you don't follow the majority, and even though the majority that's sold is for planting, this guy can say, I sold it to you for eating. Rabbi Yossi says, no, I'm sorry. He says no. He says, no sin, no demezera. He has to pay him for the seeds. Why? Because since the majority is for planting and they didn't grow, you have to pay him. So what? So you see that he does follow the majority. Amulo, now a third opinion, a second group of rabbis, a third opinion said to Rabbi Yossi, they said, what are you talking about? He says, lots of people, tons of people buy flaxseed for other things, like for eating and for medicine. Tons of people, and as a matter of fact, listen to this: more people buy flaxseed for eating and for medicine than people who buy it for planting.
But they buy
listen to this: more people buy it for eating and for medicine than buy it for. So they said, listen. They said he doesn't have to pay him because more people buy it for eating. Okay, for eating, it has the right to say I sold you for eating. No, Mantanai. So, but 1 second. So, what do you want to say? Yeah, we have three opinions here. What are the two opinions that are going to match up with one like Rav and one like Shmuel? What are you talking about? Okay. Ilema Rabbi Yossi Amrulo. If you want to say the argument between Rabbi Yossi, who said what, that he doesn't have to pay because most people buy it for eating. We Amrulo, and you want to say the arguments with the people who say what? No, pardon me. Rabbi Yossi, you said what most people. I'm sorry. With the Amrulo who said what, that he's not responsible, because people buy it for eating. He says what? That's not an argument. If I said it correctly, that's an argument. Why? Because really, even though it looks like they disagree, that Rabbi Yossi says that Rabbi Yossi says he has to pay him, and they say that he doesn't have to pay him. The truth is that even though they disagree, the truth is in the principle that we're talking about, they really agree. He says why? It's not really an argument. Why? He says Tarvayu Basaru Vasli. In the principle that concerns us, they both follow the majority. Their argument, they both agree with Rav. Okay, or the only thing is what? Mar also basaruba de inche. The only thing is that the rabbis who disagree with Yossi, they follow the majority of buyers, and Rabbi Yossi, Umar and Rabbi Yossi also basaruba de zriya. He follows what the most of the planting of the seed. Okay, that most of the seed, right? Most of the seed is sold for planting. So fewer people buy more seed for planting, but many more people buy less seed for what? For eating or for that. But the problem is what? Or for medicine. But the point is what? So that's not an argument. That's not the argument of Rav and Shmuel. You can't say, oh, this is an argument of Rav and Shmuel is an argument of the Tanaim. These Tanaim, as far as we're concerned, all these Tanaim agree with whom? With Rav. Pardon me. Ella, you have to say it's what? Ella, what's the argument of Rav and Shmuel among the Tanaim? It's this. He says, says, E Tanakama Rabbi Yossi. It's either the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. The Tanakama who says he's not responsible because you don't follow the majority, and even though the majority is a majority that's sold, the majority of what's sold is for planting, but since there's a minority that sells for what? For eating, for eating, he can say I sold to you for eating. Okay, and Rabbi Yossi says no. You follow we follow the majority, and if since the majority is for planting, he has to pay him. Okay, or Itanakama of Amalo, or it could also be the first opinion fighting the rabbis who argue with Rabbi Yossi. Why? Because again, both the rabbis and Rabbi Yossi hold that we do follow the majority, and also the Amrulo. So also the rabbis who disagreed with Rabbi Yossi, but they still follow the majority of what? Of buyers. They follow the majority of buyers, and still what? The majority of buyers, and it doesn't matter since the minority of buyers, even though it's a minority of buyers who buys for what? For planting, that's enough to exonerate the seller. It says, listen, I was selling to you like the minority of buyers buy for eating. Tanarabanan. Okay, we learned.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why don't we, just like in another bulls, we said, well, let's look at the price because the price differs. So that would be a raya. Why don't we say here, you bought a ton of seed. That's obviously for planting. Or you bought
you have to, so I don't,
seed.
actually I didn't see inside, but you have to say for the moment, like we said before, it must be what? That this particular market, that the price doesn't,
The price
doesn't tell.
But, but I'm not asking price.
Yeah.
I'm asking volume. If I buy 1 cup of flaxseed,
I have
that's
to. I'm
for
saying
sprinkling on my cow.
I'm assuming that.
But if I buy
I'm
a
assuming that's not
ton,
so. Here,
it's for planting.
no. What do you mean? What do you mean? Eli Lilly will buy a ton for medicine, and the farmer will buy a ton for planting. That's what I'm saying.
Lilly didn't exist.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Each guy they'll buy for the thing.
No,
Okay.
if you look, there seems to be a majority on both sides. The majority of people buy seeds for eating, but the majority of seed is for planting.
Yeah.
So you have it both ways. That's why
the
majority of what
the majority of seed is for planting, but the majority of people that buy seed is for eating.
Right.
So to
That's
have
correct.
a majority
That's
on
correct.
both sides.
That's
So
correct.
why you have
No, but what I was asking, what about you?
volume
But the size, what they bought, maybe it should tell. Yeah, so I'm saying maybe it's not the case. You have to know. But anyway, you're right. They no big pharmaceuticals then, huh?
I think that the volume of your purchase should be
my cousin she was a prodigy, from the time she was a kid. So but before she was barely grown, she was a professor, and cancer research and all these things. So she got bored. She eventually got bored with science, believe it or not. So she graduated all of her graduate students. She closed up her lab, and the pharmaceutical, the big Dutch pharmaceutical company, I forgot the name, it's a big place. They sent her to school. They sent her to school to become a lawyer. And she's their patent. She's their chief patent officer. She got bored. My other cousin, listen to this. My other cousin, listen to this. He shows up, for the interview. The guy says, okay, he says, why do you want to study medicine? He says, I don't know. I just think my mother would be very happy if I became a doctor. He said, son, I don't know if you're going to get into this medical school, but you will be a doctor. He said. No, he goes to school. He goes to the whole medical school and whatever he does, the intern, the resident. He's a doctor. The next day, what does he do? He goes back to school and becomes a lawyer. He's a malpractice.
And now he does medical.
All his life.
That's not unusual.
These are my cousins. Okay.
And
then there's me. Okay. All right. We learned the following. He says, Mao no saying low. Okay, I said, how much? Okay, you have to pay. But how much do you pay? So he said, the base area, you just pay him back for the seed. Okay, below it's all, but you don't pay him for the peripheral expenses. When you plant seed, you got to pay for people to plow. You got to pay people all this. No, you pay him only for the seed and for nothing else.
He loses a year's.
Below it's all right. So you pay. He pays him only for the seed and not for the expensive. Well, it's all groma. It's all secondary damage. The Yeshom, but we have a second mitzvah, no, afotzo, he has to pay him also for the expenses. Why? But not midadin, but what, as a fine. Okay, the man Yeshomim, who's the Yeshomim? So he said, I'm Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda has a chiddush. Rav Shimon Gamliel. So Rav Shimon Gamliel. Even though usually Yeshomim is Rabbi Nassan, but in this case, he's letting us know that it is Rav Chisda. Now, if it's normally Rabbi Nassan, so why would it say man Yeshomim? You have to say, we have in Tosas from many places, Tosas often tells us that the question was not serious. In other words, and not even no. Often a question is rhetorical. The questions should be rhetorical because questions are a big waste of time on paper. Questions in dialogue have value, but questions on paper are just a waste of time. You have to tell me on paper. He said, "What time is it?" It was 9:00. What? Where were we in Boston? What? It's a waste of time. So the questions are a waste of time. So in print, often it's much easier to read questions rhetorically that they're needed. So here it would be that he said, who is the Yeshomim? Since he knew that this was different than the norm, he said, who is it? It is Rav Shimon Gamliel. Now the Gemara is very surprised because they can't find a parallel that Rav Shimon Gamliel said such things. So now for the rest of the time we're going to be searching for what? We're going to be searching for a parallel that Rav Shimon Gamliel really held that you're going to make people pay for peripheral damage. Okay, I Rav Shimon Gamliel. Which Rav Shimon Gamliel? What source is that? Elema. If you want to tell me what that it's this one, when it looks like it's not going to win. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel the Masdisen. If it's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, of the beginning of our Mishnah, the beginning, the Tanan where we learned we learned the beginning of the parak that what if you sold produce and you didn't define whether it's for planting or eating. It was wrong, and the guy planted a velotzomcha that didn't sprout. We afilu zerapishta, and even if it's flax, okay, where we said where the majority is for planting, and a chaybrach, we said the guy still have to pay him. Why? Because we don't follow the majority. And then I jump and I see in the second part of the Mishnah, Rav Shimon Gamliel says, so if they're garden vegetable seeds, which nobody eats, they're only for planting, he has to pay. There's no excuse. You can't say it's all eating because nobody eats them. Then he has to pay. Okay, he has to pay. Okay, so as if to say what, and you think that what, that he must be arguing. Okay, Tanakama Nami Achikamar. No, and you would first say what? Tanakama Nami Achikamar. What do you mean? Why was Shimon Gamliel? The Tanakama said the same thing. When did the Tanakama say you'd have to pay for the seeds when they were Zerapishtan? Who did a Chaybrachus? And it was only for things where the majority is for planting. Azor Negina, but with the things that are vegetable seeds, which are only for planting, Shein Nachalim Chaybrachus, he'd agree. So it doesn't make any sense. Why did we say the name of Shimon Gamliel? Ella, you're forced to say what? The mitzvah must mean what? Labi Kabinaya must be what? Otzai Kabinaya must be what? Has to be what? Labi Otzai Kabinaya has to be what? Since it looks to be repetitious, it must be that the Mishnah is intimating to me that there's an argument. And what's the argument? Well, you have to pay also for the peripheral damage. The Mar, the Tanakama, Savar, what? He holds the Meizriya. Okay, you pay only what? Only only for the you pay you only pay for the seeds and not for the peripheral expenses. Umar, okay, and Rabbi Gamliel Savar. When he said you have to pay what? Even for what? Even for the both of you have to pay for the vegetable seed, but even for the other cost. Well, I said 1 second. Okay, nice job. But let me ask you a question. Even if you'll say to me that we can make an assumption that they're arguing, and we do many things like this. They're arguing about the peripheral. But how do you know it's in the order that you said? How do you know the Tanakama said not to pay the peripheral, or Rav Shimon Gamliel said to pay the peripheral? Maybe it's the other way. Maybe Rav Shimon Gamliel is the one who said pay the peripheral, and Tanakama not. And previously, when we learned about paying the peripheral, it was the reverse. There was a Tanakama. It was Rav Shimon Gamliel who said what? Said it, and somebody else was Yeshomrim. So he says the guy says no. Maybe it's the opposite. No, maybe it's from Shimon Gamliel who's lenient. Okay. I said, no, halakasha, you make a mistake. And this you should write up in gold and keep it in your pocket. Called Tana Basra, okay, Litfuyi Milsa Kati. There's a rule that whenever we have one type following the other, arguing the same point, but only with a slight difference, it's always the latter opinion that is the stricter one.
Right.
Okay? Okay, yeah. Nagmar says, okay, what? Nice job. Okay, but you did produce an argument out of thin air. There's an easier way. If we're already going to give hard-pressed explanations of the Mishnah, I can give you a hard-pressed explanation that's less hard-pressed than you are. Less than hard-pressed than you are. There once was, in the old days when there was what to talk about. So the Reform rabbi wanted to show up the Orthodox rabbi. She said, I'm going to show you. He says, you're not so hatsy-tatsy, you Orthodox guys. See, he says, what do you want? He says, look, get the two presidents. He gets the president of the Reform shul, and he gets the president of the Orthodox shul. The Reform rabbi says to the president of the Reform shul, he says, tell me, he says, how do you get to shul every Shabbos? So I go out, I take the keys, I get in the car, and I drive to the shul. I go in the parking lot, and I park, and I come to shul. That's it. He turns to the president of the Orthodox shul. He says, now look, you got to tell the truth. He says, how do you get to shul on Shabbos? He says, you know what? He says, well, on Fridays, he says, instead of parking my car in front of the house, so they park it all the way, a couple blocks away. And on Shabbos, I quietly leave the house. I walk a few blocks. I get into the car. I drive the car a few blocks away from the Orthodox shul, and I park it. And I come to shul, nobody knows. So the Reform rabbi said, look, he says, there's no difference between your president and my president. The Orthodox rabbi says, no, there's a big difference. He says, what's the same thing? They both drive to shul on Shabbos, and that's all. He said, no, he says, my president's embarrassed about it. He says, yes, it's not.
That guy plays golf on Yom Kippur, gets a hole in one.
Gets a hole in one.
Brag about it.
Yeah, can't brag about it. Okay, but anyway, that's the point. So over here, okay, he says, you're right. I'm gonna also give a hard-pressed explanation. But even though I'm also stuck, but my stuck is better than your stuck. I'll show there's a less stuck way. If I gotta be stuck, there's a better way to be stuck than the way you are. To produce an argument out of thin air is harder than what I'm about to do. And that is just to say that there's an assumed missing piece. Okay, and why is that? And I told you, really, according to one Gemara, whole Mishnayos was written this way. The Mishnayos was written to be a closed book, not to be an open book. It was written that people who weren't educated couldn't use it. Like I say, they wanted to destroy the world. So here's what happened. Here's what happened. There's really a part missing in the Mishnah. It goes like this. Okay, he says, Dilma, who's Shimon Gamliel? There's no argument. The whole Mishnah is Rav Shimon Gamliel. Okay, and you're not going to produce for me a Rav Shimon Gamliel who holds different than what we always thought. But Chasuri Mechsur and the Mishnah is missing a piece. This is what it said. If a guy sold produce to his friend, and they didn't specify for eating or for planting, below somchun they didn't sprout. And even if it was flax, which the majority of sales are for what? The majority of what's sold is for planting. And still the seller is not responsible because he says, I sold it for eating. And he said, and that was the opinion. That was the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Why? Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because Shimon Gamliel says, Zaroni Gina.
Only carrots.
Yeah. Vegetable seeds, you're not responsible. Pardon me, you're not responsible for.
You are responsible.
You are responsible for. But you're not responsible for what? You're not responsible for
dual purpose.
For seeds that we don't know. Where the majority. So therefore what? So you don't have any. So now you don't have any opinion that of Rosh Hashanah that says what? They have to pay for peripheral damage. Ella must be what? Har Rav Shimon Gamliel. It must be this Rav Shimon Gamliel. The Tanya, because we learned. Here you took stuff to a miller. You hire a miller to mill your grain, and the miller is supposed to wet the grain. It's supposed to wet the grain before we when you wet the grain, you're able to take off the shell. Okay, but he didn't do it. That's why by us it's very rare to find flour that we can consider Pesach dik. Why? Because they wet the flour, but they wet the grain before they they wet the grain. So he took it to the miller. Well, and he didn't soak them. In which case, what? And therefore, our son Subin, he ended up he had a lot of bran in it. Okay, or a few more. So even find a very coarse bran or not so coarse bran. Okay, but he didn't do what you wanted. Kemach lenachtam. Okay, okay. Let's say you bought flour to the baker to bake for you. And you paid him bafo possibly. He made crumbly bread that falls apart. Behemel tabach. You bought an animal to the shochet to shech benibla, and he shechted it, and it was in the goodness. It wasn't a good shechita, so he made it like it was just a dead animal. Chayiv, he has to pay. All these cases, the craftsman has to pay you. Okay, why? Because he is in the he was a paid worker, not a professional. Okay, he's a paid worker, not a professional, not a guy who did it for you for free. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says no. He says no similar to bushes. Not only does he have to pay him for the flour, for the grain, etc. He has to pay the fact that he was embarrassed that he couldn't feed his guests. In the embarrassment of the guests of showing up to eat and there's nothing to eat, they were invited nothing to eat. He has to pay the peripheral damage. And so Rishon Gamliel, so we see clear. Rishon Gamliel holds you have to pay for the peripheral damage, even though it's a grama. Okay. Rishon Gamliel also said what? There was a great custom in Yerushalayim, and that is this: that if a person gives a meal to his friend that he's going to prepare for him, the kilkula, and the person messed it up, not only does he have to pay him for the meal he messed up, he has to pay him the embarrassment that he invited guests and he wasn't able to feed them. So you see what over here, if you have to pay even for embarrassment, certainly has to pay for the outlay that a person does. That's what Rishon Gamliel. But he also has to pay for what? Also for the embarrassment of the people he invited that they didn't get to eat. Another point, which is this interesting, right? Another great minhag Yerushalayim. They were very tzanua. They made everything that people would always know what to do. So the people had to know can they find hospitality. So mapa prusa gabe petach. If there was a cloth over the doorway, which is a sign so they would have a little doorway. If the curtain was over the door, that's a sign that the door is open, and he's open for hospitality. So the guests come in. And in fact, as a matter of fact, because the curtain is there for modesty. Okay, and the stalk come up, but once the curtain's away, which means the door's closed, and they don't come in because he's not receiving people for hospitality. And that we'll call a daf. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Marty, you want to take Mel? Okay, so I can take Shimon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay dry, everyone.
I walked out. It was horizontal. The rain.
Yeah.
That came out above it.
When I came with this drizzling.
Yeah. No, it didn't stay that long. When I came in, it stopped in a minute later.
Yeah. It's going to be up and on all day.
No, it isn't.
Get the band.
No, it isn't. It's going up more.
No, I just thought of something. When I was a kid in school, we used to use ink. We had the fountain pen, right? So they had this thing that was called ink. Say you made a mistake. So they had this thing come in a little bottle called ink eradicator.
Yeah.
So you put it in the closet, right?
Yeah.
You say you paid $1 for this little bottle. One kid in the class happened to be he was into science. So he went home and he figured out what the stuff was.
Oh, he made it himself?
What was bleach.
It's just bleach.
So you bought this for $1 and then you put a gallon of bleach for $1. Whatever you called it, It's the same thing. You have these seeds for planting. Okay, you get a ton of it for $1.
Smart guy.
To get a cup of the
Smart
same
guy. Smart guy.
I think my question is still valid.
Okay, well, I'm going to listen. I'm going to use the bathroom. What's that?
Don't abuse.
Like if you're buying salt to eat, you buy a bottle.
No, I understand. If I
But
buy
you buy
a ton of
seed.
seed,
I mean,
obviously it's for
for
planting.
planting.
And I'm sure one of them, of course, you mentioned.
Okay.
That this guy had a small garden, so that it was not a riot.
Okay, fine. Aye.
What a day.
Okay.
Men, Marty, you men?
No, yeah, the door though, the one we went yesterday, that door all the way to the right, I'm parked there.
Okay, I'm sure. Good.
Okay.
You always park in the same place?
No, that's why he keeps on asking me, where we park.
I always park in the same place. So I don't have to think. Thinking is
Oh, yeah.
difficult.
What?
Right?
Yes. The door that's all,
Okay.
Let him wait. until
Okay.
you get-
too about when you do something all the time, I always said when I was
Well, he
living in,
usually goes with me, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
can't.
no, but one time, I used to park my car in front of my house
Right.
on Staten Island. So one time I took the car to show, and the show was done. I was in the car because I came back from someplace else, and to get the show on time. So I parked the car by the show and went in and just made the minion. Then usually
Then you lost your
then
car.
then I walked home. And I get up in the morning, my car had the phone in my hand to pull the cops. And then I remember the car
We
by
had
the
a
show.
woman in Long Beach who was beginnings of Alzheimer's. And she parked her car and didn't know where it was. She called the police. She said somebody stole her car. It just that she forgot where she parked it.
Yeah.
All right.
Although you realize that whatever I say could change in half a minute.
All right, you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. What's it?
If it's raining hard, stay by the door and I'll pick you up.
It's not raining.
At this moment, it's not raining. It's windy, it's not raining. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you, and you too. Thank you very much.